Hey, y'all, welcome to the next Unity Bay Area Houston relevant conversation on the science of the mind-body connection. How to influence the body with the mind and the mind with the body. But before we get into that, let's touch on the philosophy of the law of mind action, how our thoughts create reality. According to New Thought philosophy, the law of God is the orderly working out of the principle of being, or the divine ideals, into expression and manifestation through creation. Only spiritual things are eternal and real. All inharmonies and seeming limitations in the world are the result of man's error beliefs and thoughts, and man can eliminate them by eliminating error from his mind. Now, this may be a part of the New Thought doctrine, but it is not itself a new thought. We actually see the same idea echoed in Hinduism, one of the world's earliest religions. They say that all that exists is Brahman. Our goal is to realize our oneness with Brahman, but we have to get past Maya, the illusion of separateness. Once we do this, we can accept that our true self is Atman, which is essentially Brahman without the illusion of separateness. So how can we put this into an example that everyone can understand? Well, imagine you're standing on top of an island out at sea, surrounded by a bunch of other islands and island clusters. From your vantage point, it seems like every single island is separate, isolated, individual, and alone. But if you dip beneath the surface and trace along the bottom of the ocean, one shore to the other shore, we'll find that all these seemingly separate islands are actually connected. And it's only from the surface level that they seem to be separate at all. Once we go down there and check and come back up, even if the illusion of their separateness persists, we know truly that they are interconnected. So it is with our natural interconnectedness with each other and the universe. To serve the Lord is to keep the divine law, the law of right thought. It has come to be recognized as a law of mind action that men become like that which they behold, and they manifest that which they mentally see. Now, this is also one of the first steps in the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism, right view. Basically, if you want to orient yourself in the world properly, you have to be able to see clearly. You have to see properly without any kinds of illusions. This is because our thoughts and perceptions create our reality and deeply affect how we act. There are 3 steps to the law of mind action: mind, idea, and manifestation. First, there must be mind. Second, everything exists first as an idea, a mind. And third, the inherent power and intelligence in the idea causes it to act or express. And when it is expressed, we have the manifestation. Without mind, there is no perception of reality. Without ideas, there is no defining reality. And ideas do not occur without intelligence. And whatever we think, we usually manifest in some way, either in actions or moods, and our actions affect the rest of the world. This can even be really subtle. Like, let's say you're around somebody that you really don't like, but you can't get away from them. Either, let's say you run into somebody who really wants to talk to you at the supermarket, or you are stuck at a Thanksgiving dinner with a relative you're not particularly fond of. Well, you could say to yourself, well, I'm going to think all these nasty thoughts that I want to think about them in my head, and they'll never know it, but that might be manifesting in your facial expressions. You might manifest a sour expression or one of contempt or disdain, and unbeknownst to you, they might be picking it up, and that can cause conflict later down the road during your Thanksgiving dinner. That said, there are some counter-arguments to this idea, which in philosophy is called phenomenology, essentially that everything first exists in the mind as phenomena. So allegedly, when Dr. Samuel Johnson got into an argument with somebody who was supporting the phenomenology idea and said everything exists first in the mind, allegedly Dr. Samuel Johnson kicked a rock and said, "I refute it thus," basically saying that in order for me to kick that rock and feel the pain, there had to be a rock existing in the first place. And in order for you to see me do it, and us to agree upon the mutual reality that I kicked the rock, there has to be an underlying reality there. Otherwise, reality would just be made up of the billions of people's different hallucinations, whatever they happen to imprint on the world of phenomena. To put it another way, if all exists in our minds, then what is there to collectively perceive? To perceive starlight, for example, the star must first radiate photons across millions and millions of light years to hit our retinas. These stars exist whether we perceive them or not. Furthermore, we don't all act on all of our thoughts. We might see a Ferrari or a Lamborghini zoom past us on the road, but we don't necessarily say, oh, well, I would like one of those, and then we rush out to the nearest dealership to buy one. We don't even necessarily go home and look at bank loans so that we can buy sports cars. We can pass by attractive people and think certain thoughts about them without taking off our pants and manifesting those thoughts into action. We have millions of thoughts every day that we don't act on. So even though to some degree, our thoughts manifest reality, they don't always. And this really gets into the crux and the limitations of the law of mind action and phenomenology. There's a difference between reality as it is and reality as we judge it to be with values. It's one thing to say, well, I'll never find someone who will love me, and so you never look and you don't take opportunities to be loved when they come. And it's another thing entirely to say, well, I choose not to perceive gravity or extreme conditions. So to give you an example, there's one example that comes up in what I've read of Buddhism a lot, which is the rope or a snake. Essentially, it says, imagine you're at your house and somebody tells you while you're in your house to be careful when you go outside because there have been a lot of deadly snakes seen around this area. So you got to be careful. You're thinking about those snakes. You go outside, and what do you see? You see a coil of something. It's a coil of something. But you, thinking about snakes, have imprinted and projected your fears of it being a snake onto the object, saying, oh my God, it's a snake. And then instantly, you run back inside, your heart's pumping, your adrenaline's rushing through your veins, you're going into a fight or flight response, you're freaking out, wondering, oh, do I hit it with a shovel? Should I call somebody to take care of it? Meanwhile, it might have actually just been a coil of rope. Take a minute to digest that, because this helps us settle the distinction between the law of mind action and everything existing first in the mind, and a significant portion of how we perceive the world and how we act in the world emanating from the mind. If there was no substance there to perceive as a snake, we wouldn't perceive anything at all. There has to be something first there for us to perceive as a coil of rope or misperceive as a snake. There has to be something physically there in the underlying reality. And yet so much of that response, running away, the fight or flight response, having to call somebody, or possibly amping yourself up to kill a snake with a shovel, all of that comes from your personal perception, what you've projected onto it. So not everything exists in the mind or even first in the mind, but much of what we call reality does come from our personal perceptions. Now, what about the mind-body perspective? Let's talk about it from the point of view of Buddhism. Buddhism teaches that nothing in the universe has an independent existence all to itself. Everything comes from something else, or as they say in Buddhism, everything is dependently originated. This also ties into one of the three laws of thermodynamics. Matter is neither created nor destroyed, it is transformed. And it is exactly like that with your mind and your body. Everything you take into your body becomes your body and your mind in some way or another, or else it's excreted. So we know that our mind and our bodies are connected. We know that in a general sort of sense. But what does science say about it? What has research turned up? And keep in mind when we're going through this, I'm going to taper your expectations because it is all too easy to see some of these findings and get really, really excited and skew the science in a direction that confirms what we want to believe to be true and away from what actually is true and what we know. So, how does the mind influence the body? How powerful is it? And can we harness this power for our own health and well-being? First, let's look at the placebo effect. The placebo effect is fascinating and key in studying the mind's effect on the body, because when you take a placebo and you suddenly feel better, nothing physiologically has really changed about your body. You're not introducing any pain-reducing chemicals, and you're not taking them away. There's nothing chemically changed about the body, and yet the body changes simply because it believes that it should. The placebo effect was first discovered during World War II when the soon-to-be anesthesiologist Henry Beecher ran out of morphine to treat injured soldiers, and instead of telling them he could help them, he continued telling them he was giving them morphine, but really he was injecting them with saline solution. To his astonishment, 40% of the soldiers reported feeling less pain. And this began to show us that the brain can influence the body in at least some way. An injection of saline, for example, described as a drug, will not only reduce the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, but can help a patient produce more of the dopamine that the disease destroys. It seems like simply believing in a treatment can be as effective as the treatment itself. So much so that in recent studies, placebos have performed as well as drugs that Americans spend millions and millions of dollars on every year. Now, this has huge repercussions for everybody. People like you and me, ordinary consumers of products who are looking out for their well-being. When we want to feel better, if we can save our money and instead use our mind to influence our bodies, well, that would reduce a lot of stress and save us money. As well as for pharmaceutical industries that are pouring millions of dollars into research and development for drugs that, quite frankly, can be matched simply by our own mind's influence. But again, we have to be careful. We don't want to overpromise, and we don't want to fill in the gaps of knowledge with what we would like to be true. Also, when it comes to the placebo effect, there is its equal and opposite darker cousin, the nocebo effect. So placebo effect is when you believe that you'll feel better, and so you do. And a nocebo effect is when you believe a placebo is going to do harm or make you more in pain, much more sick, and so you become more in pain, you become more sick. With subjects in one study, we're told that headaches were a side effect of lumbar puncture. The number of headaches they reported after the study finished increased sharply. So there's no correlation here, none whatsoever, and yet simply by believing that they might get a headache, people gave themselves a headache. That's insane. It's fascinating, but it's insane. That's one of the most interesting things about the mind, is so much of it is mercurial. We don't know exactly how it works or why it works that way. And these studies on placebo effects that I'm going to share with you are some of the first and most interesting forays into answering this question. Our emotions and expectations affect how well a treatment works. For starters, soldiers who had gone to war and suffered serious injuries tended to decline morphine, even though they would have asked for it for much less severe injuries before they had seen combat. It seems like if you believe you can handle pain, you will handle pain better. Now, that's not to say that the pain itself isn't there. It is. But you can handle it better. Personally, I think of my mom when it comes to this. She, for whatever reasons that will continue to elude me, decided to go through natural childbirth twice. And so whenever she's in pain and I ask her, hey, are you okay? What's going on? How bad is the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? And she'll say, oh, 10, but it's nothing compared to childbirth. So that ability to believe you can survive more because you have survived more in the past can help you handle pain better. And we actually see an emotional version of this with people who haven't necessarily had serious physical injuries or physical trauma, but emotional trauma. Granted, some people will be very broken and emotionally debilitated, but other people have this sort of, I've survived all this crap in my past. I can handle anything life throws at me. Bring it on. I can take it. And that's not to say that they're not experiencing pain, but they don't let it debilitate them. The overall experience of it is not debilitating. Our body has a natural placebo effect to help us too. They're called endorphins. Endorphins are released during exercise, massage therapy, breathing exercises like yoga and Tai Chi, and sex. In fact, it turns out that if you block endorphin release with a drug, people on a placebo will experience more pain than those on the same placebo whose endorphins are allowed to flow freely. So from this research, it seems like endorphins help facilitate our mind's natural tendency to influence our body. We need our endorphins to be flowing for this to work. So, for example, later we're going to talk about mindfulness meditation. And while that is great, given this research we have right here on the screen, I think it's also important to engage in physical exercise to keep your endorphins up so that you have a better, let's call it a better infrastructure for positively influencing your body with your mind. There are some people who sadly cannot influence their body with their mind, such as the case of people with Alzheimer's disease. Because expectations and suggestion influence behavior, our bodies often begin to prepare for medicine to arrive when we expect it. As the evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers recently pointed out, what the brain expects to happen in the near future affects its physiological state. And yet the placebo effect doesn't seem to affect Alzheimer's patients. Why? Well, according to Robert Trivers, it's because people with Alzheimer's are unable to anticipate the future. They're therefore unable to prepare for it, unable to anticipate a reduction of pain or an increase of pain. The placebo effect has no effect on them. So just how powerful is the mind? Let's look at a study. In the 80s, two researchers divided a group of post-operative patients into 3 sections. Those in the first section received morphine secretly. Those in the second were told they would receive morphine, and they did. And those in the third were given a placebo described as a powerful pain reliever. Okay, now let's break this down before we get to the results, because the results are shocking. Those in the first section received morphine secretly. So in this case, there is no mental expectation of feeling better or worse. It is literally just the chemical response on the body, which for most of human history, we would expect to be the only thing that matters in modern medicine, that is. Those in the second category were told they would receive morphine, and they did. So these people you'd expect to have the most powerful reaction. Why? Because they are changing physiologically in a way that will reduce their pain. There are chemicals coming into their body that reduce pain, and they also believe it to be so. So they've got expectations working for them, they've got chemicals working for them. And then in the third category is just testing without any kind of chemicals, without anything being added to the body at all. The third category is testing just the power of the mind. So what do you think happened? Well, it's fascinating because patients who were told that they would receive a painkiller, whether they actually received it or not, had the same experience as those who secretly received between 6 and 8 milligrams of morphine. In fact, to surpass this effect of the placebo, the covert dose had to be increased to 12 milligrams, double what people secretly received, or almost double in the case of people who had 8 milligrams. So again, we would completely expect the second one to be the most pronounced because they're changed chemically and mentally. They're mentally primed to feel a reduction in pain. And yet, simply the mind's ability to influence the body is so powerful that you have to either almost double the dose of morphine or actually double it. Imagine the implications that has for us as people who are in pain, for everyone who has chronic pain, whether from old injuries or from fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, arthritis. That said, the placebo effect can get really weird and make it hard to translate into action. So for example, different doses cause different reactions, and studies have demonstrated that people who regularly suffer from headaches and regularly consume aspirin can associate the shape, the color, and even the taste of a pill with a decrease in pain. Slowly over the past decade, researchers have begun to tease out the strands of the placebo response. Although they have been difficult to translate into medicine, the results have been compelling and, again, pretty weird. So in most cases, the larger the pill, the stronger the placebo effect. 2 pills are better than 1, brand name pills trump generics, capsules are more effective than pills, and injections produce a more pronounced effect than either. Now, to some extent, some of these examples make sense. The larger the pill, the stronger the placebo. Well, if you're told you have a substance that's going to reduce your pain, then it would make sense that more of that pain-reducing substance would reduce more of your pain. The same goes for 2 pills being better than 1. So for example, you have more of the pain relieving substance, and 2 pills being better than 1 is more of the same pain relieving substance, so it would make sense that you have less pain. Brand name pills trumping generics, that one's a little odd, but it makes sense when we think about it in terms of, well, American policy. Now, that sounds a bit weird, but let me break it down. A lot of the placebo effect seems to be more pronounced in America than any other country. Why is this? Well, there's a lot of theories, and we don't know exactly for sure, but one of the most prominent and convincing ones is that America, with the exception of like 1 or 2 other countries, America is the only country on the entire planet that allows pharmaceutical companies to market directly to consumers through advertisements. Virtually no other country does that, because they believe that when it comes to your personal health, you need to meet with a doctor who knows your physical conditions confidentially and can work with you to the best of, well, your well-being. In America, that isn't the case. Many of the commercials we get bombarded with on mainstream television are pharmaceutical ads with happy dancing people as all the horrible side effects are quickly blabbed through. And many of these are not advertising generic brand name pills. You don't see acetaminophen commercials pop up, you see Tylenol commercials pop up. And so if you have people who are primed to believe, through all the happy people dancing visuals and the happy music and all the promises made in the commercials, if you have people who are primed to believe that that specific brand name drug is going to give them a lot of relief, well, then it makes sense that that expectation will lead to greater relief. Capsules being generally more effective than pills, I don't get that one. I have no theories on that. I do have a theory for why injections might produce a more pronounced effect than either pills or capsules. Generally speaking, when you get to the age where you're taking a lot of pills, especially enough to perform in a placebo study, you know that a pill takes longer to get into your digestive system, and once it gets there, it is then diffused much more slowly. On the other hand, injections are much more immediate. We know this. It goes directly into our bloodstream, and it is a lot more comfortable, usually. It's a lot more invasive. So we say, okay, well, if it's more immediate, then the pain relief should be more immediate. If the measure of invasiveness is more drastic, then it should have a more drastic result. But again, the placebo effect is weird, and it gets weirder. Colored pills are more likely to relieve pain than white pills. Blue pills help people sleep better than red pills, and green capsules are the best bet when it comes to anxiety medication. Now, some of these, to me, don't really make sense. The green capsules, I have a theory for this, which is supported by some recent research, which says, essentially, human beings calm down and experience less anxiety when they walk through nature. Now, of course, there's parts of the world which are all desert, but for the most part, nature is usually green. Plants are green because they have to photosynthesize. So I think maybe our human brains have associated that green of nature with relaxation and a reduction in anxiety in general. And so seeing the green in the anxiety medication makes us feel more calm. But again, I don't have any actual proof of that. As for colored pills being more likely to relieve pain than white pills, I now find it incredibly suspicious that my ibuprofen upstairs is a mellow kind of maroon red instead of just being white. So how do we use the mind to influence the body consciously? Well, according to Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, founder of the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, we can use mindfulness to help our bodies. He defines mindfulness as paying attention to something in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Now, each of these has an important component to it. So you pay attention to something. That's the first part. Paying attention instead of avoiding it is very important, as we'll see in the next few slides, but also in what we were talking about a second ago. If you've focused your attention on, oh, I'm going to feel better, well, that helps you feel better. If you focus your attention on, oh my God, I'm going to get a headache, even though there's no correlation between, let's say, the lumbar puncture and a headache, you'll get a headache. So first, pay attention. That's important. Second, on purpose. You pay attention to it. You pay attention to your pain or stress or whatever it is, whatever that ails you. You pay attention to it on purpose, on your terms. You don't let it dictate terms. You approach it. You do it in the present moment, and you do it non-judgmentally. Because if we don't do it judgmentally, well, we could perceive it to be more negative than it really is. And then we give ourselves a bad nocebo effect. Or we could perceive it to be more positive than it is. And you might say, well, what's the problem with that? Why would I not want to skip the neutral phase and go straight to the positive pain reduction phase? Well, let me ask you this. Can't pain be important? Don't we experience pain for a reason? If you step in an anthill, how long does it take from the point when they start biting you to the point when you jerk away till you realize, I got to get my foot out of here? It's very quick. It's reflexive. Because our bodies have evolved pain responses which blare like alarm signals saying, you need to pay attention to me because something is happening and it needs your attention. That's why you don't necessarily want to go straight to the positive end of things. Your body might be trying to tell you to pay attention to something that you shouldn't poo-poo or shoo away from your conscious thought. It might be something that you need serious medical treatment for. So first, view it non-judgmentally and neutrally, and then put the positive spin on it. It's also important to do it in the present moment, because if you spend too much time in the past, you may become depressed. If you spend too much time worrying about the future, which is not certain, it's not guaranteed, you may become anxious of what might happen. So you have to pay attention to your stressor on purpose, approaching it on your terms, in the present moment, not allowing yourself to get strung out into the past or the future, and you have to do it non-judgmentally to see if it's actually something that is worth the attention you're giving it to. Now, mind you, as we're going to see, mindfulness is a very powerful tool, very powerful tool when it comes to helping our bodies, to finding greater well-being. But it is important to note that mindfulness has been used as a supplement to medication for various conditions, including cancer, diabetes, and eating disorders, not as a cure-all. I do not want you to walk away from here thinking that mindfulness is a cure-all, that we can cure everything with our minds. That is simply not true. We are still physical beings, and if you don't think of yourself as a physical being, or you think of yourself as a spiritual being having a physical experience, you are still locked into that physical form, at least for now. And that physical form has limitations, sometimes which demand serious medical intervention. So again, mindfulness, very powerful, but it's a supplement to many conditions, not a cure-all. The goal of mindfulness in the treatment of chronic pain, for example, is to cultivate a quality of openness and experiential acceptance of pain rather than rejecting or avoiding the pain. In this way, mindfulness can be beneficial in treating chronic pain through a non-invasive approach via the mind-body connection. I'll give you two examples that have to do with avoidance. When I was in my 9th grade year of high school, which was an early college high school that heaped far more homework and projects on us than any college I have ever been to since, I would get home every day stressed and depressed, anxious, heaped up with more and more homework as the days went by. The last thing I wanted to do was do my homework. So I'd come home, plop on the couch, and play video games to decompress. And there's nothing wrong with taking some time to decompress after school or work. It becomes a problem, though, when you begin to avoid your stressor. Because you see, what happened was I was playing video games to relax, but the entire time I had the horrible, miserable homework I had to do hanging over my head like a guillotine ready to fall. And so I couldn't properly relax the entire time. I would get to the end of playing video games when I knew I should get to work, and not only was I still stressed, but I was more stressed because I had been avoiding doing it in the first place, and now I had less time to do it. So what did I do? I played more video games, and the problem got worse. And then I played more video games, and the problem got even worse than that. It took a full year of doing this before I realized what was wrong. And mind you, my mom was telling me what was wrong the entire time. She kept saying, why don't you get your homework done first? Then when you relax, it will actually be relaxing. But like a good teenager, I ignored every word she said and just kept going about what I was doing until finally I couldn't take it anymore. And then I stopped avoiding my stressor. I stopped avoiding the thing causing me mental pain. And I did my homework as soon as I got home. Unfortunately, I was not able to play nearly as many video games as I would have liked. But when I did play video games, my relaxation was actually relaxing. It actually reduced my stress. We see the same idea of not avoiding things and facing your stressors head on in this idea that productivity experts call swallowing the frog. Basically, imagine you go to work, you've got a full work day ahead of you, a lot of different tasks to do. Some are hard, some are easy, some are important, some are menial, but you know at some point during your day, you're going to have to swallow a frog. Big, fat, juicy, slimy, living frog. What time of the day are you going to swallow that frog? Let's say you wait to the end of the day. So you put swallowing the frog all the way to the end of the day and everything else before that. Well, when you go throughout your day, no matter what you do, whether it's filing papers or sending emails or solving financial problems for your business, whatever it is, you're going to have that miserable idea of swallowing the frog hanging over you the entire time. You're going to feel tense, you're going to feel stressed. And again, you might not be doing anything that actually causes you that much stress. But because you're avoiding the thing that you know will cause you stress, the thing that you're projecting you'll have to do in the future, you're feeling more stressed now. Mind you, you're not eating the frog for, let's say, you work a 9-to-5 job for 8 more hours. You're not eating that frog, and it is causing you pain. So productivity experts say, okay, well, what if you take that frog, that thing, that task that you're rejecting, that you're avoiding, and you move it to the beginning of the day. You move it to the very beginning. You swallow it. It's nasty. It's disgusting. It's not a pleasant experience, but you get it over with. Suddenly you'll find your day gets easier. Now, why is that? Why would your day get easier? Essentially, you're doing the same tasks. It gets easier because you're no longer avoiding the thing causing you the most amount of stress. You've gotten out of the way, and in addition to that, comparatively, everything else doesn't seem as bad. The same goes for chronic pain. If you reject or avoid it, like an alarm signal, it will keep blaring and screaming for your attention. Or, as I like to think of it, like if you've got a kid and you go to the park together and you're trying to read a book or a magazine or you're on your phone and the kid is going, Mom, look, Mom, look, Mom, I'm about to do a thing, Mom, look, Mom, you're not looking. They're going to keep calling for you until you look. And then you look and they do the thing and they stop doing it. Now, that's not to say they're not going to do it again, just like chronic pain. They might start up again. They might keep doing it. But as long as they keep calling for your attention, why not pay attention to it? Focus on it so that even for a little bit, you can get a respite. Now, mindfulness is wonderful for a couple of reasons. One of which is that we can do mindfulness anywhere at all. Okay, there is no way to run out of mindfulness like you'd run out of a prescription medication. You won't go to the customs at an airport and they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, your mindfulness isn't allowed in this country. You have to leave it behind. You can do it anywhere, at any time, for any reason. And it's completely free. There's no premiums on mindfulness. There's no copays. There's no chance of your insurance rejecting you for saying, oh, well, I'm sorry, you've got free dental, but you don't have free mindfulness, so are bad. No, mindfulness is completely 100% free, and there's no side effects. None at all. We are in the midst of an opioid epidemic because people have been prescribed drugs that have horrible side effects, that are addicting, and that if they try to stop them, they go through withdrawal, and their health seriously declines. Their lives are in danger. Now, again, I'm not saying mindfulness can solve everything or even the problems that people take opioids for, but you can't withdraw from mindfulness. You can't overdose. You cannot overdose from mindfulness. There is not going to be a mindfulness epidemic. And if there is, it's not going to be a bad thing. So mindfulness is great because we can take it anywhere, do it at any time. It's free, and there's no negative side effects. And the results are astounding. There are neurological changes involved in differentiating between the sensory experience of pain and the emotional response to pain. Identifying these experiences as separate or uncoupling them from the emotional response through mindfulness techniques allows us to distinguish between unpleasant sensations and secondary emotions in the context of pain, thus reducing the body's sensitivity to the unpleasant experience. So let's say you've got arthritis in your knee. You have the physical pain of the arthritis, and then you might have secondary emotional contextual pain that says, I'll never be able to walk through nature again and truly enjoy it because this pain is going to make such enjoyment impossible. Or I can't walk as much. Therefore, the people I normally go for walks with will consider me a burden, and they won't want to go with me. They'll leave me behind. Well, that's also called catastrophizing. But in this case, those two things, those pains, are interlinked a lot of the time for a lot of people. When you uncouple them, you can see that the arthritic pain you have is not the same thing as the emotional context you've attached to it. Now, again, uncoupling them doesn't make the pain necessarily go away, but it does make the overall experience of pain less unpleasant, which is why you see some people who are perfectly able-bodied, perfectly physically fit, and yet they seem miserable. And you see other people who are confined to wheelchairs, disabled, their bodies hunched over, and yet their smile is shining like the sun, like they don't have a care in the world. They're smiling like the other able-bodied people ought to be smiling because they have uncoupled their physical pain and physical sensation from the emotional context that they could give it. All those negative associations about being worthless and hopeless and crippled and all that, they've uncoupled them and they become happier for it. Some researchers reported that mindfulness-based stress reduction practices were linked to alterations in the autonomic nervous system, specifically an increase in regional frontal lobe blood flow, which was associated with the attenuation of chronic back pain and effective depression symptoms. The frontal lobe plays an important role in reframing the contextual evaluation of an event. Now, this is very important because we don't live life logically in a causal chain of A happened, which led to B, which led to C, to D, to E, da, 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 da. We don't live like that. We live with emotions. If you think back on any memory, any experiences you ever had, it is tied to emotions. You always feel some way about it, even if that emotion is just confusion about, well, you're not sure how to feel about it. You always feel some emotion tied to it. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Because if you're emotional about things, well, emotions are the spice that give life its flavor. It's what makes life worth living. Because if you live life completely logically, you'd be like a robot. And where's the enjoyment in that? So you need emotions. And our minds take those emotions and they weave everything that happens to us into a story narrative. Usually we're the hero. Other people are support characters, side characters, allies, antagonists, villains. And again, this is completely natural. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this. But if you have chronic pain or you've gone through a traumatic event, you can begin to weave negative narratives, negative stories about yourself that make you more stressed than you should be. And in turn, that stress weakens your body. So reframing the contextual evaluation of an event, uncoupling negative emotions from it, reframing it into a more positive story, even a proactive story, even if you didn't come out on top, you can say, well, what can I learn from this? So that you at least win in some kind of way. That is very important, both in mindfulness and our own mental well-being. So let's look at some of the actual scientific studies here. Expert meditators compared with control subjects reported significantly less unpleasantness from a painful stimulus received during meditation, which was associated with enhanced activity in the dorsal anterior insula and the anterior midcingulate, two areas of the brain associated with attentional processing. There it is again, attentional processing, attention. Meditators also had significantly less activity in the amygdala, an area associated with pain anticipation. Remember the placebo effect. If you anticipate something happening in the future, you can influence your brain to do it. Lumbar puncture people anticipated a headache, and a lot of them got headaches. These findings support the mindfulness principle, which suggests that openness of oneself to an experience of pain, rather than avoidance, may reduce the mind's tendency toward anxiety, which can further worsen pain. Now, this is fascinating, but we do have to keep a couple of things in mind here. Firstly, these expert meditators, what is an expert meditator? Is it somebody who really, really enjoys meditation? Is it somebody who calls themselves an expert? They consider themselves to be an expert? Well, no. An expert meditator is defined as somebody who has meditated for a total of over 10,000 hours. I did the math on that. That is over 416 days of nonstop meditation. How many of us have meditated that much? Probably not that many. Now, we might meditate a lot. We might even meditate an hour every day, which is more than most people in the world. But have we meditated over 10,000 hours total? The people in this study were either very old and they had done meditation intermittently or regularly throughout their life so that it added up to over 10,000 hours, or, and I've seen a number of case studies like this, the expert meditators surveyed are people who are Buddhist monks living in temples, and they frequently go on 1 week, sometimes up to 3-year meditation retreats. Well, I think you can imagine they'd rack up a lot of meditation hours doing that, but how many of us, especially in the modern world with modern jobs, modern families, have the ability to do that? The second thing we want to keep in mind is that they experienced significantly less unpleasantness from the painful stimulus during the meditation. This study itself says nothing of the pain they experienced afterwards or a certain amount of time down the line. So this study is fascinating, but unfortunately it only appeals to a very small group of people, the likes of which you and I probably do not fit into. However, there are other studies. So there's a thing called mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy, which is a structured weekly meditation program with standardized guidelines, which is good because that makes it easier to measure. And it involves a combination of mindfulness meditation, body awareness, and yoga. Researchers examined a functional MRI scan of the brains of all the people who completed a 6-week course of this mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy. And the fMRI was conducted at baseline and 6 weeks after completion of the course. Participants who completed the course experienced significantly less subjective pain elicited by a thermal stimulus compared with control subjects who did not complete the course. Now, one of the things I love about this is the thermal stimulus, probably the most sciencey way to say that we put something hot on them and saw how they reacted to it. And the other thing, twofold, is the experience of significantly less subjective pain after 6-week completion of the course. There's two parts to this. First of all, if they only did it at baseline and right at the end of the course, that wouldn't be a very good measurement because, I mean, that's right after the peak of it. That's like saying, well, we're going to measure people before and after they work out to test the long-term benefits of exercise. And so you've got these scrawny guys at the beginning, and you say, that's my base measurement. And then you get them ripped and you say, okay, well, that's the end goal. Well, is it really? Or are they going to lose that muscle mass over time? After all, when you work in medicine, when you work with any kind of medical treatments, you want to do something that is the least invasive and the most effective for the longest amount of time. In this case, 6 weeks after completion of the course, and they were still experiencing a significant reduction in pain. That's incredible. But even more than that, these are people who have not necessarily meditated over 10,000 hours. These are people like you and me who got this huge this huge pain reduction through a 6-week course. That's a month and a half. Can you spare a month and a half to find ways to influence your body with your mind, to have profound positive impacts? I can. So this study is far more applicable to people like you and me, and it's much, much more promising. The areas of the cortex that are active when we sense conflict or are aware that we have made an error are a source of influence over the adrenal medulla. Dr. Strick says that these findings raise the possibility that activity in these cortical areas, when you reimagine an error or beat yourself up over a mistake or think about a traumatic event, results in descending signals that influence the adrenal medulla in just the same way as the actual event. Now, this is fascinating, and it has profound implications for people who are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. But it also has implications for those of us who tend to ruminate a lot. I tend to ruminate a lot because I'm a perfectionist. And there's this misguided notion in the perfectionist mentality that if I just go back again in my mind, if I just go back one more time and revisit that time I messed up, I revisit that thing that hurt me, I just go back one more time, I'm going to find something that will make the trip into the past worth it. It's going to improve my life now, it's going to improve my life in the future. And yet, from these findings, we see that there is a cost associated with this mental journey to a traumatic past. Namely, that you can reactivate the same stress response you had then, now. So, we shouldn't cut rumination out altogether, right? But we should be mindful of our reasons for going back there. And let me be clear on this. Rumination has a purpose to it. We cannot live strictly in the present all the time. That would be impossible. We wouldn't, if we never lived in the future, if we never projected ourselves into the future, we wouldn't save for our retirement. We wouldn't even buy groceries for the next weekend. We would just buy from when we're hungry. So we have to have some orientation towards the future, and we have to have some orientation towards the past. Why? Because the present is constantly becoming the past. And so to evaluate our mistakes and prevent those mistakes from being repeated, we have to evaluate our past and ask ourselves, what did I do wrong? What can I do better to make sure that mistake never happens again? The only mistake, some people say, is to not learn from your mistakes. And I believe it was the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates who said, an unexamined life is not worth living, because if you don't examine your past, you're not going to have the ability to avoid those same mistakes in the future. You're going to be caught in a cycle of pain. And yet, again, from this study, we can see that there is a cost to going back to the past. So if you find yourself in a cycle of rumination, ask yourself this. 1, why am I really going back there? 2, what do I really have to learn from it? And 3, if you're going to go back there, make sure you write it down or do something that allows what you learn to stick in your head. Because if you don't remember it, you're going to keep going back there to refresh your memory. So write it down, articulate what you've learned from the past so you don't have to revisit it again and again, because there is a cost to it. The same stressors happening to you again and again. That said, there are limits to the mind's influence over the body. One of the foremost supporters of the mind-body influence, Dr. Ted Kopchuk, acknowledges that placebos are not magic potions. Placebos don't shrink tumors, he says. They don't make blind people see, and if you are paralyzed, they won't help you walk. He deplores the grandiose claims of alternative medicine and prefers to rely on data. Now, y'all, this is really important because Dr. Ted Kopchuk is not one of those naysayers who thinks that the best way to solve a medical problem is to throw pills, and more pills at it. This guy has been on the mind-body influence train, so to speak, for years now, even back when it wasn't popular, back when it made it tough for him to publish his papers. So this guy is very much on the side of mind-body influence. And that's why it's important to acknowledge that even he is saying the mind cannot do everything. It cannot cure cancer. It cannot cure paralysis. It cannot make blind people see. There are limits to the mind-body influence, no matter how profound it is. if you are having a serious medical problem, please consult a medical professional or a doctor. This doesn't mean that you can't do mindfulness meditation. You absolutely can. As we saw earlier, it's a great supplement for treating conditions. But sometimes, in many cases, I think, especially for serious conditions, it is not the cure. So what about the body? We know that the mind and the body are intricately connected. In fact, there's this old Norse legend that reminds me of the mind-body connection. I'm greatly going to simplify it here. Once upon a time, there were two groups of people having a competition. Loki promised one of the sides that if he won, I don't really remember what he got in return, but if Loki lost, then the guy who won could have Loki's head. He could cut off Loki's head, but Loki had the stipulation of, you cannot touch anywhere else on my body. You can have my head, but you can't touch my body, all right? So the guy said, okay. Loki loses. The guy comes to collect Loki's head. And Odin, being the great dad he is, says, well, you made a bad deal. Time to cough off your head, Loki. And Loki says, well, I don't want to. They say, you have to. So Loki goes over to the guy and says, okay, fine. Remember, you can have my head, but you can't touch anywhere else on my body. So how are you going to remove my head without touching my body? And the guy pulls out an axe or a sword or something like that. And he's about to do it when he realizes there's no way to remove his head without touching his body. Because you'd say, oh, well, the head's up here. But if you remove it, you're touching the neck, and that's not the head. You go down here, that's more neck. You go up to here, well, that's still neck, still body. If you try to pinpoint the separation between the head and the body, it becomes increasingly difficult. And you begin to realize that the two are intricately linked. So it is with the mind as well. The mind may be up here, and certainly it's the central hub of all neural activity, and it is what we use to control our body. I mean, we can lose a lot of our limbs, and as long as we've still got our brains in our heads, we're fine. And yet, our central nervous system extends all the way down to our tailbone, communicating with the rest of our body. Our minds and our bodies are intricately linked. So now we know that the mind can have a profound influence on the body, but what about the body on the mind? Well, let's talk about nutrition, such as fatty acids. Essential fatty acids like omega-3s and omega-6s prevent degenerative brain conditions, so eating foods like nuts, seeds, and fatty fish plays a crucial role in making and maintaining our cell membranes. Why is this important? Because we want to live long and maintain the consciousness to enjoy it. As we saw earlier with the Alzheimer's patients, if your brain degenerates or becomes diseased to the point where you have Alzheimer's, then you are no longer able to influence your body with your mind. It is much easier if you eat nutrition that prevents these things from ever happening than it is to try to cure it afterwards. As of right now, there is no cure for Alzheimer's. The mind cannot influence the body significantly, and the body, well, there are grandiose claims that you can eat certain things that cure Alzheimer's, but that simply hasn't been proven. So you have to take care of your body with good nutrition like fatty acids. And then there's proteins and amino acids, which are incredibly important because they're the building block nutrients of growth and development. They manipulate how we feel and behave. Amino acids contain the precursors to neurotransmitters, and neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers that carry signals between neurons, affecting things like mood, sleep, attentiveness, and weight. Now let's look at all these things individually. They manipulate how we feel. As we know, emotions can color the entire context of an event positively or negatively. So we want to give our bodies and our brains the best fighting chance to feel good and behave well. We want to feel good, so we need to supply our bodies with things that will allow us to release feel-good chemicals. And proteins and amino acids contribute to the release of feel-good chemicals like dopamine and serotonin. They also influence our behavior, such as whether we do a mindfulness meditation for our own benefit, or whether we decide to skip it and watch Netflix for 8 hours straight. They affect our mood and our sleep, our attentiveness. Man, you want to talk about attention and how important attention is. Well, attention is important. And our brains, you'd say, well, our brains are mostly responsible for attention, and you're right. But our brains don't exist in isolation. We have to feed our brains good nutrients so that they can have proper high-functioning attention. And sleep, you ever woken up after a bad night's sleep and you're just miserable the whole day? You don't make good decisions a lot of the times when you're sleepy, when you're in a bad mood and you're sleepy, you're groggy. You don't wake up and say, oh man, I'm craving exercise and fatty fish and citrus fruits. No, you crave things like chocolate and bread, maybe fried chicken. You make worse decisions. And then that can become a self-reinforcing cycle. You're in a bad mood, you have bad sleep, so you eat something you shouldn't. Now that lack of nutrients or bad food you're putting in your body makes you feel worse. And because you're feeling worse, you make the same bad decisions and over and over and over again. So it's important, again, to supply our bodies with proper nutrients, including antioxidants and vitamins. Antioxidants in fruits and vegetables strengthen the brain cells to fight off free radicals that destroy brain cells, enabling our brain to work well for longer periods of time. These antioxidants are considered micronutrients, but they're not the only ones we need. We also need vitamins B12, vitamins B6, and folic acid to keep our brain's functionality from declining and becoming diseased. On top of that, we also need good dietary fiber. Speaking of, never, if you can, never, ever eat white bread. White bread is extremely processed, and there is not a single organism on the entire planet that has evolved to digest it. Not birds, not ducks, not seagulls, not turtles, not even you. So when we talk about dietary fiber in breads, we're talking about whole grain breads, the type that you can buy from the bakery and are not white bread. Dietary fibers are also they also come from fruits, nuts, vegetables, and legumes. This is very important because they help keep the bacteria in our gut healthy. They help nourish the gut barrier, they improve our immunity, and can help reduce inflammation, which leads to all kinds of nasty problems like an increased risk of cancer and depression. So you've probably heard about the gut biome because, well, it's all the rave along with mindfulness right now. What mindfulness is to the mind's influence on the body, the gut biome is to the body's influence on the mind. And part of this is just a lot of sensationalism and skewed science for, lifestyle magazines trying to sell copies and websites and blogs trying to sell ad space. But there is some actual science behind your gut biome. So according to nutritionist, microbiologist, and neuroscientist Rory Robertson, your gut's microbiome is as diverse as the Amazon rainforest. There are thousands and thousands of different species of bacteria living in your gut with different functions. And they do a lot of things. They control your blood sugar, your blood cholesterol levels. They produce essential hormones and vitamins. They respond to infections and medicines, and they even play a role in osteoporosis, which becomes increasingly important as you get older and your bone health deteriorates. In fact, and this blows my mind every time I hear it, there are so many gut bacteria inside you, so many that a total of all your total cells in your body, 90% are bacterial. 10% are human. It almost seems like we're bacteria having a human experience. But of course, that's not true. The only reason why we have that high percentage of bacteria to human cells is because the bacteria is very, very, very tiny, so they can be compiled into a smaller space. Still, considering how many human cells we have, that is a lot of bacterial cells. These gut bacteria are a self-reinforcing group, meaning the more good fibrous food you eat, the more good gut bacteria you'll have because these gut bacteria use those nutrients to reproduce and make more of themselves. Of course, if you deprive yourself of these good foods or you switch your diet to one that's low in fiber, high in fat, like burgers on white bread or deep fried chicken or deep fried Oreos or really deep fried anything, honestly, then these good gut bacteria die off. And in their place, your gut becomes inflamed. And some of your gut bacteria will actually start to eat the mucosal lining in your gut, which is a disturbing thought, but really all you have to do to prevent it is eat some whole grain fibers. And that's not too hard. I mean, some people think that they're bland, but really Google a recipe or two. There are ways to eat all of these healthy foods I'm talking about in a way that is delicious and feels like a treat, not a punishment. Our intestines are physically connected to our brains via the vagus nerve, and signals are sent both ways, which would make you think that they're dependent on our brain. But apparently, they're not. According to Rory Robertson, our intestines continue to work with a so-called mind of their own even when we sever this connection. Our brains are made of 100 billion neurons. Our gut has 100 million neurons. Now, comparatively, our brain has a lot more, and of course they do. It's the central hub of all communication and neural activity, so of course they do. But still, 100 million neurons is quite a lot, especially for an organ system that for a lot of medical history, we've really just thought of as squeezing through nutrients, squeezing food through our body, extracting what nutrients they can and excreting what it can't. The fact that our gut has a huge infrastructure for communication says that there is something more going on in our guts than meets the eye. Our gut microbiome, for example, is the center of our immune systems, meaning a subtle change here can influence our immune functions and, if prolonged, can influence our brain's health. Plenty of feel-good chemicals are produced in our guts, including serotonin, nature's feel-good chemical. In fact, 90% of serotonin is produced in our gut and only 10% in our brain. That, to me, is fascinating. And it reminds me of a lyric from Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit song I was listening to a couple days ago. We have to feed our head. Now, in their case, I know they were talking about drugs, but in this case, I'm talking about proper nutrition. It's part of the reason why probiotics have been selling off the shelves in recent years. Everything from containers that are literally just probiotics and to Greek yogurts, which is very good for you. It helps your gut bacteria to flourish, to keep you healthy, to have a lasting effect. You know, I'm a big believer in doing things that help yourself with the least amount of effort. You know, you could get a transplant, let's say. You could have a probiotic drink every single day, or you could eat things that influence your gut bacteria to reproduce and produce more of themselves to keep you healthier. Or you could do both. Either way, it is critical for you to keep your gut healthy and to give your body the nutrients it needs, to give your brain and your body the best fighting chance against stress and anxiety. Because as we saw earlier, stress and anxiety can physically cause us more pain. That said, just like the mind's power over the body's power over the mind is limited. Jonathan Eisen, a professor and microbiologist who studies the ecology of microbes at the University of California, Davis, says many of the popular findings of microbiome health have been influenced by skewed science. So, for example, the idea that gut bacteria transplants can treat multiple sclerosis, celiac disease, and Crohn's disease is completely unfounded. Professor Eisen also critiques the notion that you can use bacteria to battle breast cancer, prevent stroke, and cure Alzheimer's disease. Just like the mind's influence over the body, this is hard to study because there are a lot of variables at play. The microbiome has 400 million different variables that we can measure. There are different sites, different species, a relative abundance of each one of those species. Some have more than others. There's a lot of variation. And when you have that much variation, well, it can seem like anything causes anything else. And to give you an example of this idea that correlation is not causation, let me put it this way. The more you and I breathe, the more people die. Now, those two things are not causally related, right? Me and you breathing doesn't cause people to die. But if we were to chart it on a graph and put it in a lifestyle magazine, it would seem like as you and I breathe more people die. And yet those two things aren't linked at all. So we have to be careful about assigning causation to things that are only correlated. And the same mental guards that we've got to put up against the skewed science of the microbiome applies to nutrition in general. Again, all of these things are important. We know that without food, the body dies in a couple of weeks, right? So we don't have complete mental control over the body. It needs physical sustenance. And yet, even though the body will die without any sustenance, sustenance cannot prevent death itself. It cannot even prevent such serious diseases as Alzheimer. Well, it can prevent them, but it can't cure them, you know. So taper grandiose claims with reason, skepticism, and of course, you have the internet at your disposal as well as I do. So if you're curious about any of this stuff, please Google it, research it, use good sources, and let me know. So what does all this mean? Well, research on the placebo effect has shown our mental attitudes can profoundly affect our bodies. Our expectation of the future significantly affects how we experience pain or lack thereof. Still, our mind can't conquer everything. Mindfulness, approaching our sensations in the present moment, non-judgmentally as an observer, has proven an effective supplement for medical treatment. Mind you, that is a supplement, not a cure-all. If you are having serious medical problems or you think you might be, please go see a licensed medical professional. That said, uncoupling the sensation of physical pain itself from the emotional context of it, whether it's the stories we tell ourselves about how we're worthless or a burden on others, or we project our anxieties in the future of, oh, I've got arthritis in my knee, I've got chronic back pain, therefore life is worthless and meaningless, and I'm not going to be able to enjoy walking through the woods. Uncoupling those two things can make the experience of chronic pain and illness less unpleasant overall. Doesn't mean you're not having pain. Doesn't mean you're not suffering from what ails you. But it does make it a bit more manageable. Doing mindfulness meditations, yoga, and Tai Chi, we can reduce our responsiveness to pain. And mindfulness, we can do anywhere, anytime. It's free, and there's no negative side effects. So practice mindfulness, especially during these times when a lot of people are experiencing anxiety, frustrations, fear, stress, tenseness in their bodies. Mindfulness meditation can seriously help us all out. But our mind, of course, isn't everything. Our brains are part of our bodies, and what we eat profoundly affects our mind's ability to help us in return. It is crucial we supply our gut's biome with healthy nutrients to produce good chemicals. We need to eat good fibrous foods like whole grains, staying away from processed foods like white bread, eating antioxidants and vitamins, amino acids, proteins. We have to diversify our diet so that we can continue to enrich ourselves with nutrients without getting bored. Because I promise you, if you get bored of your diet, your healthy diet, you're probably going to turn towards the things that taste really, really good. So find ways not only to eat nutritious food, but ways to enjoy it and diversify it. In return, your gut will improve your immune system and produce feel-good chemicals like serotonin and dopamine and fight inflammation. The mind-body connection is inseparable. Both are important, both are necessary, and both need our attention and care. Both can change our lives for the better if we treat them well, or for the worse if we don't. But remember, neither of these things are a miracle cure. There are limitations to even powerful influences over our body. And if you are experiencing a serious medical condition, by all means, use mindfulness and nutrition as a supplement, but please seek professional medical advice. Thank you all for coming to this talk. I hope you've learned a lot from it. These are my sources. The YouTube videos are TED Talks. Thank you all once again, and good night.